It was an ordinary evening at the city's most luxurious restaurant. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the room with a golden glow, reflecting off the wine glasses and expensive dishes that decorated the tables. Men in ties and women in sophisticated dresses occupied every corner of the room. The air was filled with the scent of spices, fine meats, and imported wines. Everything exuded wealth and ostentation. In the center of one of the most imposing tables was Alberto Santoro, a millionaire known for his arrogance and coldness. He owned companies, mansions, and an empire that many envied. With his perfectly slicked back hair, impeccably tailored Italian suit, and a perpetually haughty gaze, he exuded power. But with that power came contempt. Contempt for anyone he considered inferior. Across the room, almost invisible to the wealthier customers, was Raphael, a humble waiter of just over 25. With his worn uniform, his apron already stained from the night's work and his face weary, he moved from table to table with a discreet and respectful demeanor. He wasn't just another waiter. He was the breadwinner of his family, supporting his sick mother with the little he earned. Despite the weight of life, his eyes still held something few could see, dignity and hope. But that night, fate would make sure to put the two face to face. Raphael approached the millionaire's table, carrying a tray with 2 glasses of red wine. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from fatigue. He had worked since early morning without rest. With a polite smile, he leaned over and placed one of the glasses in front of Alberto. "Here you are, sir," he said in a low voice. Alberto looked up slowly, as if deliberately taking his time to examine whoever dared interrupt his conversation. His lips curved into a smile filled with contempt. "Sir?" he repeated mockingly. "Do you know who you're talking to, boy?" Raphael remained silent, only nodding his head in respect. But Alberto wasn't satisfied. He loved to show off his power, especially in front of his friends, who chuckled quietly at the scene. "You're just a waiter," Alberto said, raising his voice so everyone around could hear. "Nothing more. A servant. Someone born to serve us." He paused, staring at Raphael as if he were an insect. "By the way, you look nervous. Could it be that you're shaking because you've never held something so valuable? That glass costs more than your entire month's salary." The entire table erupted in laughter. Raphael's heart sank. He swallowed hard but remained steadfast. He didn't want to lose control. He needed the job, he needed the money. His mother depended on it. "I apologize, sir," he said humbly. "I didn't mean to disturb you." But Alberto wasn't about to stop. "He took pleasure in humiliation. Excuse me?" he repeated, laughing. "A man like you has no right to look up at me." Then, in a disgusting gesture, he pulled a 100-real bill from his pocket, crumpled it, and threw it on the floor at Raphael's feet. "Here you go, kid. It's more than you deserve. Take it and go buy something decent to wear." Raphael froze. The entire room seemed to fall silent. Some customers watched the scene with discomfort, others with contempt, matching Alberto's. The waiter took a deep breath, his hands clenched into fists for a brief moment. But he didn't react. With his head held high, he simply replied, "Respect, sir, cannot be bought with money." The words, spoken in a firm but calm voice, echoed in the hall. For a moment, Alberto lost his smile. The arrogance gave way to an expression of contained fury. His friends watched him, waiting for him to react. Then his face hardened. He leaned forward and whispered, "Get out of my way before I make you lose this miserable job." Raphael walked away without bending down to pick up the money that had fallen to the ground. His heart was pounding, but inside him there was something greater than shame. The certainty that one day life would exact this humiliation. But that scene wouldn't be forgotten anytime soon. The whole restaurant was talking, and Alberto, in his vanity, felt he had won. For him, it was just another night, another demonstration of power. But for Raphael, that would be the turning point. The flame of overcoming was beginning to burn silently. Little did Alberto know that life's twists and turns are relentless, and that humble waiter, despised in front of everyone, would one day hold in his hands the fate of the man who humiliated him. There was a moment of silence after Raphael's reply. A short but heavy silence, like the air before a storm. Then the whispers returned, creeping between the tables. Muffled giggles, venomous comments, stinging looks. The restaurant dining room, so proud of the glitter of chandeliers and the gleam of money, now glowed with something else. Cruelty. Raphael took a deep breath and stepped back, maintaining his posture. His chest burned, but his steps were firm. He walked through the swinging door toward the kitchen, and as soon as the door closed, the noise changed. From the civilized clanking of the dining room to the heated chaos of the restaurant's heart. Pots roaring, knives dancing, people running, steam and haste. The smell of garlic, wine, and seared meat tried to console but failed. The humiliation still throbbed. "Dude," he whispered Clara, a colleague in an apron already yellowed with age. "I saw everything. Are you okay?" Raphael nodded without looking. He placed the tray on a counter and washed his hands as if trying to cleanse his soul. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I just need to finish my shift." Whites, the manager, appeared. Cheap suit, expensive sweats, a practiced smile. The man of protocols and best practices, and the phrase Raphael hated most. "The customer is always right." "Raphael," Bianchi said, his voice soft only when he wanted to impose something harsh. "Mr. Santoro is, let's say, dissatisfied. Go there and apologize, bow down, show deference, got it?" Raphael looked up. There was dignity there, even tired. "I apologized for the discomfort. I will not kneel for anyone." Bianchi's face tightened. "You're great at what you do, I know." The manager's hand rested on the waiter's shoulder as if the weight helped. "But Santoro is important. He organizes events here, brings powerful people. He doesn't want trouble, he wants pleasure. If he wants his wine to sing, the bottle will duet. That's how it works." From the back of the kitchen, the chef Osvaldo, he listened but said nothing. He only increased the heat of a frying pan which hissed like a snake. Raphael dried his hands. He saw his own distorted reflection in a stainless steel lid and thought of his mother, Donna Helena, who at that moment must have been lying in the small room of the kitchenette, breathing carefully, the television low, the tea lukewarm, the Bible open. She thought about her medicine, the rent, the gas. She thought about tomorrow. "I need the job," he said, without compromising his dignity, but accepting reality. "I'll go there. Do my job." Bianchi smiled in relief as if he had gotten rid of a weight and moved on. "That's it. Go ahead and sort it out. Show some class," and he lowered his voice even further. Santoro dropped a note. "You know," no comment. "You dropped it." Raphael felt his stomach churn, but he just nodded and picked up the tray. On the other side of the door, the world of chandeliers and masks waited. SFX. Swinging door. Sound from the hall increases. Tense music. Alberto Santoro saw him approaching and smiled like someone who sees a fish returned to the hook. Beside him, Nico, a friend with an easy laugh and a clear conscience, drummed his fingers on the table. There was also a woman in a silver dress, a bored look on her face, her phone always raised, as if life only had meaning when it fit into a story. "Well, well," said Santoro theatrically. "De servo," it returned. Raphael set down the tray with precision. Glasses, decanter, napkins, everything in its place. Professionalism you can't buy off the shelf. "Is there anything else you would like?" "Yes," Alberto replied, leaning back in his chair. "I wish you learn." He pointed with his chin to the floor. The crumpled note remained there near the table like a wounded animal. "You left something liquid." Raphael eyed the note as if it were poisoned bait. Around him, neighboring tables were interested in the scene. The woman in the silver dress activated recording mode. Hungry eyes came from people who eat expensively and feed off other people's embarrassment. "That's not mine, sir," said Raphael. "Yes, it is," the millionaire insisted with a sharp smile. "It's yours, reality. Handle a second of silence." Bianchi's face appeared distant behind the bar counter like a warning beacon. Clara, from the dessert station, froze, a plate of creme brulee in her hand. Did Raphael kneel? No. He bent down without bending his dignity. He picked up the note with 2 fingers, like someone picking up trash from the floor to clear the path for others. He straightened up and deposited the note on meat next to the millionaire's hand. "The restaurant floor must remain clean," he said calmly. "The mesa. Everyone decides what to put on top." A collective "oh" echoed through the room. The phrase was simple yet cutting. Santoro's smile returned, now more strained. Nico laughed briefly, awkwardly. The woman in the silver suit held her phone closer, sniffing out the perfect clip. "You think you're witty," Alberto muttered. "Too bad wit doesn't pay the rent." He took the note, folded it neatly, and got wet in the wine from his own glass. The red crept up the paper. He lifted the dripping note and rubbed lightly on Raphael's apron, staining it. There, now it suits you, someone gasped in astonishment. Another table laughed. Bianchi took 2 steps forward but didn't arrive. Raphael stood property. The wine ran down, making trails on the cloth. He took a breath and replied, "Do you wish to account now? Or do you prefer one more bottle?" Santoro's table fell silent. The millionaire leaned his elbows against the waiter and sized him up like a jeweler sized a stone, trying to find any fractures. He found none. "Bring the best bottle in the house," he said, challenging. "And bring it quickly." Raphael nodded and walked away. The entire room cringed. Some called it a spectacle. Others, who still retained a shred of empathy, looked away. The sound of conversation lost its tone. The restaurant's music, always pleasant, became strange, out of place, as if it didn't belong in the real world for a few minutes. At the bar, Bianchi came towards Raphael. "Are you crazy?" he whispered. "Do you want to lose your job?" I want work," Raphael said firmly. "And I want the floor to stay clean." Bianchi turned his head, looking at Santoro's table, the pointed cell phones, the expressions. With hurried gestures, he indicated a very expensive bottle. Raphael took it carefully. His hands were no longer shaking. When he returned to the table, Arthur, the sommelier, was trying to maintain protocol. He showed the label, talked about the vintage, the terroir. Alberto didn't even hear. He was more interested in dominate than in tasting. "Let him serve," said the millionaire, pointing to Raphael. "I want to see if this time he pours it in the right place." Raphael tilted the bottle. The wine danced in the glass, a deep ruby without a drop missing. Then he poured the others with the same precision. He placed the decanter in the center, the cork beside it, the napkin neatly lined, all in the restaurant's exacting style. Professionalism doesn't demand applause. It demands respect. And respect there was contraband. "Anything else?" he asked. "Yes," Alberto replied with a smile that looked like a knife. "A toast." He raised his glass. Everyone at the table followed suit. The room was attentive. Santoro turned his face slightly to the side, as if knowing where his best light is, and declared loudly enough to reach neighboring tables. "A toast to each one in their place. To waiter serving, and to us reigning. Poisoned smiles, clinking crystals, vibrating liquids." Raphael didn't move. He just held his breath for a moment. The toast broke into laughter. The narrator, whom you imagine listening now, would say, "When arrogance toasts, destiny takes note of the glass." Raphael stepped away from the table and past an older couple who had seen the entire scene. The man discreetly leaned in and spoke softly. "Young man, your firmness is worth its weight in gold. Don't let it break you." Raphael nodded in silent gratitude. 2 tables away, the woman in the silver dress was editing the video, adding quick captions, "Millionaire puts waiter in his place," followed by a laughing emoji. Her finger hovered over publish. She hesitated. Her gaze landed on Raphael. For a second, humanity. Then she was back to being an audience published. SFX, cell phone vibrations, notifications pinging in various places, music with a high note. In the kitchen, the pace quickened. Orders piled up. The heat increased. A forgotten pan released a stubborn wisp of smoke. Osvaldo turned off one stove, turned on another, and shouted, "Hand in the square!" The clock passed midnight as if it didn't want to be noticed. Raphael, back in the hallway, leaned his forehead against the wall for a second. He remembered his mother again. He reached into his pocket and felt for his cell phone. He'd missed a call from her about 10 minutes ago. His heart sank. He called back, leaning against a hidden pillar in the hall. "Mom? Is everything okay?" Donna Helena's voice came weakly but serenely. "Yes, my son. I just called to see if you've eaten yet. And to tell you that I'm praying for you. God sees you, okay? Don't lower your head, no." Raphael closed his eyes. He smiled inwardly. A mother's simple blessing is a kind of invisible armor. "I'm almost done, Mom. I love you. I love you more. Take care." He put away his phone and returned to work. As he passed Santoro's desk, he heard the millionaire comment to Nico. "This here goes bomb. I've already sent it to a group. The title will be, 'The Waiter Who Thought He Was a Person.'" Nico laughed. "Relax, friend. Tomorrow no one will remember." Alberto smiled, pleased with his own wickedness. "It's not for remembering. It's forlorn." Raphael stopped. Not for long. Just long enough to feel the wound and decide not to bleed in public. He went to a table in the corner and gathered plates, glasses, and napkins. As he went back and forth, his steps gained a steady cadence. Resistance with each table he served. A memory. The resume he printed at the internet cafe. The free courses he watched on his phone. The hours wasted commuting. It won't be today, he thought. It won't be here. The room, however, seemed to conspire. A group at the next table, already more drunk than elegant, began to provoke him. "Hey, champ," one of them said, snapping his fingers. "Bring another round and see if you don't tremble, okay?" Raphael brought it. He didn't tremble. As he set down the last glass, he smelled something. Live but different, a trail. A note that didn't match the expensive perfume from the salon. Something burned. He instinctively lifted his face and looked at the kitchen door. The coming and going seemed to exude a too warm breath. Osvaldo's eyes met his on the other side for just a second, and there was a silent message. Press. Raphael placed the tray on the sideboard and took 2 steps toward the kitchen when Santoro's loud laugh pulled him back. "Hey," the millionaire called. "You forgot to pick this up." He pointed to the now wet note drying on the edge of the table. "You're going to get it, dirty floor?" The nearby tables held their breath, waiting for another act of humiliation. Raphael turned around and stared at the note. The world seemed to slow down. The waiter reached out, took the paper, calmly folded it, and put it on the tray where there should only be work objects, not character tests. "The floor is still clean," he said. "The rest, each one must resolve it for himself." Santoro laughed. But the laughter didn't reach his eyes. SFX, a distant beep. Then another, more insistent. Music changes tone. Clara appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face pale. "Rafa," he called, not shouting, but with an urgency that cut through the room like a thin blade. "Come now." The burning smell remained, of course. The beep turned alarm. The sprinkler from the pasta station, he attempted to sneeze. A curtain of attention rose over all the tables. Glasses stopped in midair. Cell phones were raised. Bianchi ran 2 steps, torn between the facade of elegance and the need for control. Raphael was already halfway there when the revolving door opened violently, and an employee appeared, coughing, his eyes burning. "Smoke in the kitchen," he said. "Turn everything off." And before any organized response could arrive, there came the sound no one in the room wanted to hear. A crack. Dry. A flash fast, the shin of a small fire in the hands that held the wrong pan, in the wrong place at the wrong time. In seconds, the perfect restaurant descends into chaos. And when panic grips the room, whoever you humiliated may be the only person capable of saving everything. Do you want me to continue now with part 3-3 to close the first chapter with the bombastic twist? The hall that seconds before exuded luxury and arrogance plunged into chaos. The dry crack of the flaming pan echoed like a contained explosion, and smoke began to spread through the kitchen, drifting through the swinging door like a poisonous shadow. SFX. Alarm going off. Sound of sprinklers preparing to go off. Customers jumped to their feet in alarm, chairs scraping across the marble floor. Women screamed, men tried to maintain their composure. But the truth was that the fear does not spare status. In a few seconds, the suited elite showed themselves to be vulnerable, as human as anyone else. Raphael, without hesitation, ran toward the kitchen. His steps were firm, different from the silent calm of before. Now it was instinct. Clara was already trying to extinguish the flames with a wet cloth, while Osvaldo shouted incoherent orders. The fire licked the exhaust fan, spitting dangerous sparks. "Fire extinguisher. Quick!" Raphael shouted, his voice firm, surprising even his colleagues. He grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall, broke the seal, and, with the precision of someone who'd seen safety training ignored by everyone, pulled the trigger. The white foam swallowed the red flames, muffling the roar of the fire. But the panic in the room only grew. Outside, Alberto Santoro stood, his face drawn, his arrogance gone. He looked around, unable to decide whether to run, give orders, or feign control. His friends had disappeared among the customers, pushing and shoving to reach the exit. The smell of smoke permeated the space, mingling with expensive perfume and the sweat of desperation. And it was at that moment that he realized, had no power in the face of chaos. No money, no title, no imported suit could contain the fire or guide the people. Santoro turned and saw Raphael, the same waiter he had humiliated, advancing firmly, instructing his colleagues, "Clara, take the customers through the side exit. Osvaldo, turn off the gas now. João, help the lady at the corner table. His voice was clear, firm, unmistakable. For the first time that night, someone wastrelly leading. Santoro wanted to shout orders too, but his throat went dry. He just watched helplessly as the scene unfolded. And then, as if fate were determined to prove a point, one of the ceiling lights snapped, sending sparks flying. Panic spread in waves. People shoved each other, dropping glasses, tripping over bags and chairs. It was at that moment that Santoro slipped on the wet floor, falling to his knees. The man who had so often humiliated others was now on the floor, coughing, swallowing smoke. His eyes looked up and in the confusion saw only one figure approaching. It was Raphael. He reached out. Not as a servant, but as a human being, as someone who still believed in the value of life, even the life of someone who had spat contempt at him. Santoro hesitated. His pride wanted to refuse. But the fear of death, the smell of fire, the certainty of weakness made him do what he never would have imagined. He begged, "Please." Her voice broke. "It helps me." And at that moment, the entire room seemed to witness a symbolic scene. The arrogant millionaire on the floor, begging for help from the humble waiter who had previously called him nothing. Raphael firmly grasped his hand and pulled him to his feet. He said nothing, there was no need to. His actions spoke louder than any words. He led him to the side exit, protecting him like any other customer. Outside, on the sidewalk, fire engine sirens echoed in the distance. The cool night air felt like a relief after the choking smoke. Customers gasped for breath, some cried, others talked on the phone, but everyone stared silently at the waiter who, minutes earlier, had been the target of public humiliation. And now, before everyone, he was the one who stood out as the strongest figure that night. Santoro, still panting, leaned against a wall. His suit was dirty, his image tarnished. But more than that, he was wounded where it hurt most. No ego, he knew he would never forget that moment. The moment he had to beg for help from someone he had scorned. Raphael didn't celebrate. He didn't mock. He simply walked away discreetly, returning to helping his other customers and colleagues. His dignity remained intact, unshakable even after so much humiliation, and so ended that night, a night that began with an arrogant toast and ended with a desperate plea for help. Sometimes life doesn't need years to show its justice. Minutes are enough. The millionaire who thought he was invincible fell to his knees before the waiter he called nothing. Because in the end, it's not money that defines who we are. It's how we treat others. And that was just the first twist of fate. But what happened after that night would change the course of their lives forever. When the shift finally ended, the restaurant was plunged into the silence of the wreckage. The smell of smoke still permeated the walls, but the fire had been contained. Some employees were saying goodbye with weary looks. Others were still trying to clean up what was left. Raphael left through the back door, carrying his battered backpack. The early morning greeted him with the typical big city chill, and the nearly deserted streets echoed with solitary footsteps. He walked slowly, feeling the weight not only of his body but of life itself. There was no car waiting, no taxi reserved. Raphael took the early morning bus, along with people invisible to most, janitors, cleaners, workers who sustain the city while it sleeps. He sat near the window, his head pressed against the glass, vibrating with every pothole in the street. Outside, imposing buildings slept like indifferent giants. He closed his eyes for a moment and let the scene of humiliation return. The note thrown on the ground, the wine staining his apron, the laughter. But along with this memory, the image of his mother, fragile, smiling even in her pain, also returned. "Don't lower your head, no. God sees you." Her voice seemed to echo inside him, louder than any insult. After a 40-minute drive, Raphael got off in his neighborhood. The streets were narrow, poorly lit, and the smell of simple food wafted from some windows. He climbed a short hill and stopped in front of an old 3-story building. The iron gate creaked as it opened. The apartment was small, almost a matchbox, but it was home. Upon entering, Raphael smelled the familiar scent of chamomile tea. The living room was simple, a worn sofa, a small wooden table, and an old television. In the corner, a noisy fan tried to push the heavy air. At the bedroom door stood Donna Helena, his mother. Her frail body struggled to support itself, but her smile was wide. "Are you here, my son?" Her voice was soft, tired. "I'm home, Mom." He came closer, kissing her forehead. You should be asleep by now. I can't sleep without seeing you safely back. She held his hand as if holding a piece of her own heart. So how was work today? Raphael took a deep breath. For a moment he considered telling her, but then he decided against it. He didn't want to worry his mother. It was rushed as always. But everything worked out, she nodded, believing. Her gaze reflected confidence in her son, as if he could carry the world on his shoulders. And in a way he did. After helping his mother lie down again, Raphael went to the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator, almost empty. A liter of milk, a tub of margarine, some eggs, and a pot of soup. He heated the soup on the stove, ate slowly, thinking about the next day. The bills on the table were a constant reminder of reality. Rent, medicine, electricity, and water bills. His waiter's salary barely covered everything, and any unforeseen event was a nightmare. But Raphael didn't give up. In his few breaks, he watched business school videos on his phone, dreaming of a different life. He believed that knowledge was the only weapon he had, the only chance to break the cycle of poverty that seemed to trap so many families like his. Before going to sleep, he took out an old notebook where he wrote down ideas, phrases, even business plans that came to his mind. It was his secret book of dreams. There he wrote how he would like to open a coffee shop one day, or perhaps a small restaurant where everyone would be treated with dignity, customers and employees alike. That morning, with the memory of the humiliation still fresh, he wrote, "It's not money that makes a man great, but character. One day I will prove it." He closed the notebook, lay down on his simple bed, and fell asleep with that promise engraved in his heart. The world seemed unfair, but Raphael didn't know that soon. His life would begin to change unexpectedly, and that his path would cross again with the one who had scorned him. The sun hadn't even risen yet when Raphael's alarm clock rang. It was 5 o'clock in the morning. His heavy body begged for a few more hours of sleep, but life didn't afford him that luxury. He got up quietly so as not to wake his mother, and went to the kitchen to prepare a simple coffee, hot water, grounds strained through a worn strainer, and a piece of stale bread. As he sipped his coffee, he opened his notebook again. Between yellowed pages, he scribbled ideas that might never come to fruition. But for him, writing was resistance. It was telling himself that there was still something beyond the grueling waiter's routine. On the cover, it was handwritten, "Diary of a Different Future." Then he went to his other job. Because yes, in addition to the long nights at the restaurant, Raphael worked odd jobs during the day to make ends meet. That morning, I was supposed to be unloading boxes at a grocery store. The owner paid little, but it was good money. The neighborhood was slowly waking up. Children still in their pajamas, ladies sweeping the sidewalk, crowded buses already passing by on the avenue. Raphael walked quickly, his backpack light on his back, but his mind heavy with worries. Arriving at the grocery store, he was greeted with a cold wave. The work began immediately, lifting weights, stacking boxes, organizing merchandise. Sweat poured, his hands ached, but he kept going. Nearby, other workers complained, but Raphael remained silent. For him, complaining didn't pay the bills. Hours later, exhausted, he returned home. His mother was waiting for him with a simple plate of rice and beans. Her expression betrayed her concern. "Son, you can't keep going at this pace. You'll be exhausted." He smiled, trying to reassure her. "I can handle it, Mom. I just need a little more time. Things will get better soon." But deep down, Raphael knew he was carrying more weight than he should. That afternoon, before heading back to the restaurant, he lay down on the couch for a few minutes. He grabbed his phone and opened free course videos. They were classes on business administration, marketing, and finance. He listened attentively, even though he was tired. Each word was a brick, slowly building the foundation of his dreams. Deep down, Raphael believed that studying was his only way out. It was the key that could open doors that money never could. He wrote in his notebook, "While they sleep, I study. While they spend, I save. While they despise me, I prepare." That evening, back at the restaurant, Raphael donned his battle-stained uniform again. He entered through the back door and was greeted by Clara, who whispered, "Hey, have you seen it?" The video of that scene from yesterday is already circulating on the internet. Raphael froze. Video? Yes. The woman at the silver table posted it. It's full of comments. Some laughing, others angry. He felt his blood run cold. It wasn't just the humiliation in front of clients. Now it was in front of the world, but he didn't react. He just took a deep breath and replied, "Then let them talk. I have more to worry about." And he went back to work. As he waited tables that night, his gaze wandered beyond the room. He didn't just see glasses and silverware. He saw the distance that separated him from the world he dreamed of. A distance made of denied opportunities, of disguised prejudice, of doors that only opened to a few. But even so, he believed that one day he would be on the other side of the table, not to humiliate, but to prove that dignity is more valuable than gold. The world seemed against Raphael, but fate had something different in store. An unexpected opportunity would arise, capable of changing the course of his life forever. That week, life went on as usual, exhausting, silent, full of invisible struggles. Raphael worked at the grocery store in the morning, made deliveries for a neighbor in the afternoon, and returned to the restaurant at night. It was a never-ending cycle. But one rainy Friday, something different happened. The restaurant was bustling, packed with customers seeking refuge from the cold and rain. Raphael scurried between the tables, balancing trays with precision. The scene seemed to be the same over and over, until a middle-aged man in a simple suit and with a watchful gaze entered alone. He sat at a discreet table in the corner and calmly surveyed the room. Raphael went to attend to him. "Good evening, sir. Would you like to see the menu?" The man smiled. "Good evening." "Yes, please." As Raphael handed over the menu, the man commented, "I see you work very carefully. Your movements are firm even with so much pressure." Raphael smiled slightly, not understanding if that was a compliment or just conversation. "Thank you, sir. I do what I can." During dinner, the man didn't seem interested only in the food. His eyes followed Raphael, as if assessing something beyond his worn uniform. When he finished the meal, he called him back. "Boy, tell me something. Do you study?" The question took Raphael by surprise. "I study when I can. I take some free online courses. But I haven't had the opportunity to go to college yet." The man nodded, as if he had already expected this answer. "Of course you should. You have poise, discipline, and intelligence in your eyes. These are rare qualities." Raphael remained silent, not knowing what to say. "What's your name?" the man asked. "Raphael, sir. Nice to meet you, Raphael. My name is Augusto. I work in investments and also run a social project. I enjoy people watching. And you caught my attention." The words echoed in Raphael's mind for the rest of the night. As he cleared tables, he thought, why would someone like him say that to me? Why to me? At the end of the day, when he left through the back door, Augusto was waiting for him under the awning, protected from the light rain. "Raphael," he said bluntly, "I won't take up much of your time. I saw how that man Santoro treated you a few days ago. I also saw how you reacted firmly but without losing respect. That's not common." Raphael swallowed. He hadn't realized he'd been watched so closely. "I want to make you a proposal," Augusto continued. "I have a small business that's growing. I'm offering business scholarships to young people who have potential, but lack the resources. You fit that profile." Raphael's eyes widened. "A scholarship? Yes, I can help you get started. But the effort will have to be yours." The rain increased, drumming on the asphalt. Raphael's heart pounded, harder than on any night of humiliation or hard work. For the first time, someone saw something in him beyond his waiter's uniform. He took a deep breath and replied, "I accept." Augusto smiled, extending his hand. "Then let's start changing your story." That morning, on her way home, Raphael couldn't hold back her tears. She told her mother everything, who, overcome with emotion, squeezed her hand tightly. "I knew it, my son. I knew that God had something in store for you." And so, in the midst of the darkness of routine, a small light began to shine. The despised waiter, who lived between bills and humiliation, received an unexpected opportunity. Sometimes life chooses those that no one chooses, and when you least expect it, the door to overcoming begins to open. But Raphael didn't know yet. This chance would be the beginning of a path of greater challenges, and that sooner or later would take him back to the man who once made him bleed inside. The next morning, Raphael woke before his alarm. His body was still tired, but his mind was awake. The conversation with Augusto had affected him deeply. For the first time in a long time, he felt something new could happen. As she prepared coffee for her mother, She explained in more detail what the investor had proposed. Mrs. Helena, with tears in her eyes, held the cup with both hands as if holding a blessing. You will succeed, my son. God has opened this door. Enter with courage, Raphael smiled. Deep down, I was afraid too. Afraid of failing, afraid of not measuring up, afraid of missing out on opportunities because I wasn't born on the right side of town. But he decided he wouldn't let fear win. On Sunday afternoon, he met Augusto at a discreet cafe in the city center. The investor brought a briefcase with some documents. Raphael, Augusto began, this scholarship is for young people who show resilience. I usually bet on those who have more thirst than privilege, and you demonstrated that. Raphael listened attentively, almost in disbelief. It will be a business administration course at a private college. I'll cover the tuition. In return, I'd like you to work part-time at my company, learning hands-on. In your company? Raphael asked in disbelief. Yes. It will be hard. It will require discipline, but it will open doors that previously seemed closed. Raphael's heart was pounding. He accepted without hesitation. The following week, his new routine began. In the mornings, he continued helping his mother and doing odd jobs. In the afternoons, he went to Augusto's company, a growing investment firm. At first, his tasks were simple: organizing documents, serving coffee, helping with spreadsheets. But even in these roles, Raphael observed everything closely. He wrote down unfamiliar words, discreetly asked questions when he didn't understand something, and gradually began to learn the basic concepts of administration, finance, and leadership. In the eyes of his colleagues, he was just the new intern. But deep down, he knew he was taking the first steps toward a different future. At night, he attended college classes. His waiter's uniform had been replaced by simple yet clean and well-kept clothes. In class, he sat at the front, hanging on every word of his professors. While some colleagues complained about the content, Raphael absorbed every detail like gold. For him, this wasn't just theory. It was the key to escaping the life he was leading. And yet, he never abandoned his humility. During breaks, he continued studying on his cell phone, jotting down motivational quotes in a secret notebook. Knowledge is the only asset that no one can take away from me, he wrote one night, but life wouldn't hand her everything on a silver platter. With the new routine, fatigue increased. She often arrived home after midnight, studied late, slept little, and still woke up early to help her mother. Her body complained, but her mind insisted, don't give up. Donna Helena, even though fragile, made a point of encouraging him. You are planting, my son, and those who plant with tears will one day reap with joy. These words were like fuel on the days when Raphael felt like quitting. The future was beginning to open up before Raphael. But he didn't yet know that this journey would lead him to face new challenges, and that soon, the business world would confront him with old wounds. Raphael's first week at Augusto's company was a mixture of fascination and fear. The corporate building was imposing, with glass doors, an elegant reception area, and people bustling about with briefcases and cell phones. Coming from a restaurant counter and a grocery store cashier routine, it seemed like a whole new world, strange, distant, almost unattainable. He entered for the first time with unsteady steps, but with his eyes attentive to every detail. He knew he couldn't waste this opportunity. In the early days, they gave him simple tasks: organizing physical files, sorting invoices, labeling old folders. It was, in a way, an extension of what he did as a waiter, serving. But Raphael saw it as training. Every document that passed through his hands was a window into understanding how a company worked. At night, when he got home, he wrote everything down in his notebook: terms, acronyms, department names. He researched online, studied, and wrote summaries. He didn't want to be just an intern. He wanted to learn the language of that world, but not everyone saw his efforts. Some employees looked at Raphael with disdain. Whispered comments in the hallways escaped like barbs. That one looks like it won't last a month. Augusto has these ideas about social projects. But a company is not charity. I bet you barely know how to use a spreadsheet. Raphael listened but didn't respond. He simply let each sentence become fuel. Silently, he promised himself, I will prove that I can. One day, an important meeting was about to take place. An employee was supposed to organize the folders containing client reports, but carelessly left everything scattered around. The clock was ticking. Augusto would walk in at any moment. While everyone was despairing, Raphael offered, "Leave it to me. I'll organize it." No one took him seriously. But within minutes, he had assembled each folder, sorted them chronologically, and numbered them with colored post-its. When Augusto entered the room, he found everything ready. "Very well," he said, looking directly at Raphael. "I see you're not wasting any time." It was the first time the young man had heard a true compliment within the company. The nights were getting shorter and shorter. Raphael divided his time between work, college, and caring for his mother. But the sparkle in his eyes showed he was experiencing something greater than exhaustion. In a business class, the professor talked about leadership. Raphael wrote down a phrase that stuck with him. "Leading is not about commanding, it is about serving with purpose." Serving with purpose. This thought resonated deeply with him. He thought about how he had been humiliated in the restaurant, treated as someone lesser, and he vowed that if he ever had people under his leadership, I would never repeat that. Augusto observed everything closely. He noticed how Raphael arrived early, took notes, asked discreet questions, and learned quickly. And he also noticed the weight the young man carried on his shoulders, even though he tried to hide it. One afternoon, he called him into his office. "Raphael, I know your life isn't easy, but I want you to understand one thing. The pain you feel today can become your strength tomorrow. Use each difficulty as a brick to build something solid." Raphael simply nodded. He wasn't a man of many words, but inside him, those phrases rang like hammers shaping steel. Raphael was beginning to gain ground, but the business world would still test him with much tougher situations. And soon an unexpected encounter would bring his past of humiliation face to face with his future of achievements. Days turned into weeks, and little by little, Raphael was no longer seen as just the scholarship boy. His attitude began to attract attention. Some still underestimated him, but others quietly began to respect his dedication. It was on a Monday morning that fate decided to test him. The unexpected problem, an important client, had scheduled a surprise meeting. Augusto was tied up with another commitment and called the company, "Prepare the reports and meet the client. I need everything to be impeccable." Panic spread. The employee responsible for the key figures had forgotten to update the spreadsheet. Time was running out. The client would arrive in 30 minutes. His classmates looked at each other nervously. Then Raphael silently opened the spreadsheet on his computer. He remembered his college classes, the nights studying formulas, the videos he watched on his cell phone. His hands began to type. "What are you doing?" one of the analysts asked mockingly. "This isn't for you," Raphael didn't respond. He continued filling out the forms, cross-checking data, and correcting numbers. In 20 minutes, he had rebuilt the entire spreadsheet, with organized graphs and tables. He printed the reports and handed them to his supervisor. When the client arrived, everything was ready. The meeting went smoothly. The recognition, at the end of the day, Augusto returned to the company and heard what had happened. He called Raphael into his office. "I heard you saved the meeting." He crossed his arms, studying the young man in front of him. "How did you do it?" Raphael replied simply, "I only used what I learned in class. And I didn't want the company to be embarrassed." Augustus smiled. "You have something that can't be bought, commitment. That's what makes great men." After that episode, something changed. The looks of disdain began to transform into looks of respect. There was still resistance, of course, but it was no longer possible to deny Raphael's ability. He himself felt different. For the first time, he realized that the effort of so many nights wasn't in vain. His dream was no longer just words scribbled in an old notebook. He was beginning to experience his transformation. The silent oath that night when he got home, Raphael opened his notebook again. He wrote firmly, "Today I proved to myself that I am capable. It doesn't matter where I came from, it matters where I am going. And one day those who despised me will see that dignity is a man's greatest wealth." Donna Helena, from the bedroom doorway, watched in silence. Her heart swelled with pride. "I said, my son, God is with you." Raphael closed the notebook and smiled. There was no revenge in his eyes, only determination. The waiter who had previously been invisible was now beginning to become indispensable. The unexpected opportunity was just the beginning of a much greater journey. But fate still had in store the most painful reunion of all, the one with the man who had once humiliated him in front of everyone. While Raphael climbed step by step, Alberto Santoro began to lose the empire he believed to be eternal. Raphael's discreet rise. The following months were filled with intense transformation in Raphael's life. At Augusto's company, he was no longer seen as just the social grant intern. Now he was recognized as someone who solved problems, always attentive, always willing to learn, always with an attitude that mixed humility and firmness. He wasn't afraid to stay late to review spreadsheets. He didn't complain when given difficult tasks. And above all, he didn't waste the opportunity he'd been given. In college classes, he was the student who sat at the front, asked questions, and excelled at his work. Professors commented on his dedication. Classmates who had previously ignored him began seeking him out to form groups. But Raphael didn't let pride get the better of him. He knew he still had a long way to go. Each achievement was just one step of many. Study nights often. After returning from college, he would pick up his notebook and review the contents until late at night. His worried mother would ask him to rest. "Son, you are not made of iron." "I know, Mom, but I need to enjoy it while I have the strength." And so, between cold coffee and tired eyes, he grew stronger. Every financial math formula, every management theory, every case study was like a piece of armor to him. He was preparing for much bigger battles. While Raphael grew up in silence on the other side of town, Alberto Santoro's life began to fall apart. He still frequented fancy restaurants, still flaunted imported cars and expensive clothes. But behind the scenes, his empire was showing signs of cracks. Risky investments weren't yielding returns. Partners were suspicious of his authoritarian stance. Once solid businesses began to falter, Alberto ignored the signs. To him, problems were like servants, they were there only to obey. But reality didn't. One night at a meeting with investors, Alberto lost his temper when asked about numbers. "Are you doubting me?" he shouted, banging on the table. "I'm Alberto Santoro. I don't make mistakes." The silence in the room was deathly. Some looked at each other, worried. The man who had once inspired confidence was now beginning to inspire fear and distrust. Meanwhile, Raphael, in another reality, was learning precisely the importance of humility, teamwork, and listening. Two worlds were moving in opposite directions, about to collide again. Fate had already drawn the line of Alberto's downfall and Raphael's rise. But when those lines intersected, no one would be prepared for the impact. One morning, upon arriving at the company, Raphael was called to Augusto's office. His heart raced. He was never called without a reason. Upon entering, he found Augusto with some reports open on his desk. "Raphael, I need you," said the investor. "We're about to analyze a new client. I want you to prepare a complete dossier. Company history, risk analysis, profit projections." Raphael's eyes widened. It was a job normally left to experienced analysts. I can try, sir," he said humbly. "It's not trying. It's doing. I know you can do it." The young man left the room with the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, but also with the flame of confidence burning. It was his chance to prove not just to Augusto, but to everyone that he wasn't there out of charity. For 2 weeks, Raphael immersed himself in the reports. He studied every line, every number, every detail. He borrowed books from the college library, searched for articles online, and asked professors questions. His notebook filled with doodles, improvised charts, and motivational quotes. He slept little but worked diligently. Even Clara, his friend from the restaurant, noticed when he arrived more exhausted than usual. "You're killing yourself, Rafa," she said, worried. "No, Clara, I'm building myself." The day arrived. The meeting room was full. Analysts, supervisors, and Augusto himself were waiting. Raphael entered with printed reports and a flash drive with the presentation. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was firm. He explained the numbers, presented the risks, and suggested strategies. He spoke clearly, with the confidence of someone who hadn't memorized a text but truly understood what he was saying. In the end, the room fell silent for a few seconds, until Augusto slowly clapped his hands. "Excellent work, Raphael. You not only delivered what I asked for, but you went above and beyond." He looked at the others. "This kid is going to go far." Raphael smiled discreetly. Something was changing inside him. He no longer saw himself as just a waiter trying to survive. He was becoming a professional. At home, he told his mother everything. Donna Helena cried with emotion, hugging him tightly. "I always knew, son. You have a gift, and the world will have to recognize it. Raphael treasured that moment. It wasn't the applause that mattered. It was the certainty that he wouldn't disappoint those who always believed in him. Meanwhile, Alberto Santoro faced a silent nightmare. Once profitable businesses were beginning to lose money. Partners demanded transparency. Banks pressed for debt relief. But Alberto didn't accept criticism. He remained arrogant, blaming others for his problems. In a tense meeting, one of his oldest partners went head-to-head. "You're leading the company to ruin, Alberto. If you don't change your stance, we're out." Alberto laughed mockingly. "You need me. I am the name, I am the empire. Without me, there is nothing." But when he left the room, he noticed something that made him tremble. One by one, his allies were beginning to abandon him. While Raphael rose, gaining respect and opportunities, Alberto sank, losing allies and credibility. The clash between these two worlds was ever closer. The success of his presentation opened doors. Augusto decided to take a bigger gamble. "Raphael," he said one morning, "I want you to accompany me to external meetings. I need you to see how the market moves in practice." It was an invitation that, for any intern, seemed impossible. Raphael accepted, humbly but also firmly. At the first meeting, he watched silently as Augusto negotiated with businessmen. He noted every detail, the tone of voice, the pauses, the body language. Later, Augusto asked him, "What did you learn?" Raphael replied, "Numbers are important, but trust is even more so." Augustus smiled. "Exactly. Business is done between people, not just spreadsheets." Few knew it, but Raphael also began offering small ideas for the company. Simple but useful suggestions, process optimization, new organizational methods, even customer service strategies. At first, some colleagues scoffed. But as the ideas began to take hold, the jokes turned to respectful silence. The transformation was already visible. The waiter who once carried trays now carried projects. While Raphael climbed the ladder step by step, Alberto Santoro faced his first major public breakdown. One of his multi-million-dollar investments failed. The project had been announced with fanfare, surrounded by journalists and flashbulbs, but ended in debt and scandal. The press descended on him, headlines splashed his name, and partners sued him. In the same luxurious restaurant where he used to humiliate waiters, people now whispered as they saw him enter, "Look there. It's Santoro. They say he lost millions. His empire is crumbling." Alberto pretended not to hear, but every word was like acid corroding his pride. The clash of destinies. While Alberto was making negative headlines in the newspapers, Raphael received his first positive mention on the college website. "Scholarship student stands out at investment company." The news went unnoticed by the world. But for him and his mother, it was like a magazine cover. Donna Helena kept the printed page with care. "This is just the beginning." My son, and Raphael believed it. Deep down, he knew that destiny was preparing something greater. An inevitable encounter between his present of achievements and his past of humiliation. While one descended the steps of ruin, the other climbed the steps of overcoming. Life, silent and relentless, was already lining their paths for a reunion that would change everything. And as Alberto's fall deepened, he discovered that the only outstretched hand that could save him was the very one he had scorned. The empire in ruins, Alberto Santoro still saw himself as a giant. He walked with his chest puffed out, wore expensive suits, and drove luxury cars. But behind the facade, his empire was beginning to crumble. First came the failed investments, a beachfront resort that was never completed, a tech startup that lost its capital, a real estate development stalled by irregularities. Then came the dissatisfied partners. Men who had previously applauded him now demanded explanations, numbers, transparency. Alberto reacted with shouts, threats, and arrogance. "You're lucky to be by my side." He would yell at meetings, "I'm the reason you make money." But in practice, there were no longer any profits, only debts. The collapse soon leaked to the newspapers. Headlines began to pop up. Alberto Santoro's empire in crisis. Investors abandoned million-dollar projects. From luxury to decadence, what happened to Santoro? With each news story, Alberto's mask of power wore thin, but he wouldn't admit it. He bought more cars, attended more parties, as if he could suffocate the truth with ostentation. But even his friends began to drift away. Dinner invitations disappeared. Business tables were empty. The man who had once humiliated so many was now the target of whispers and laughter. One night, Alberto walked into his penthouse apartment. The silence was deafening. The city lights shone through the picture window, but they didn't illuminate the emptiness inside. He opened a bottle of expensive whiskey, poured himself a glass, and looked at his reflection in the glass. For a moment, he didn't see a millionaire. He saw a tired man with deeper wrinkles, with a lost look in his eyes, but pride prevented him from admitting it. "They need me," he murmured to himself. "I'm still Alberto Santoro." He drank until he believed his own lie. Meanwhile, in a poor neighborhood in the city, Raphael studied diligently. He divided his time between Augusto's company, college, and caring for his mother. He was tired, but determined. On the same night that Alberto was drowning himself in whiskey, Raphael wrote in his notebook, "True power is not in humiliating, but in lifting up. He who sows respect reaps dignity. Two men, two realities, one falling, the other rising. Life was responsible for aligning them again." Alberto's downfall was still in its infancy. He didn't know it, but he would soon lose everything he thought was unshakable, and you would be forced to look at the same ground where you once threw money to humiliate. The abandonment of the partners' meetings that were once filled with applause and toasts were now battlefields. The partners, previously flatterers, became accusers. "You deceived us." "Alberto," one of them said, slamming stacks of papers on the table. "You promised profits that never came." "Investors are running away," another retorted. "No one trusts your name anymore." Alberto, red with rage, stood up. "You are ungrateful. You only got where you are because of me." But one by one they got up and left. The door slammed shut. For the first time in years, Alberto felt the weight of loneliness in the business world. The banks started calling. Demands arrived in formal letters with short deadlines and veiled threats. "If you do not regularize payments, we will begin enforcement proceedings." With each reading, Alberto's heart raced. But he tried to ignore it. He continued to attend parties, restaurants, and social gatherings, as if he could fool everyone, including himself. But the waiters no longer treated him with reverence. Some whispered as he passed. Others remembered the old scene in which he had humiliated Raphael and whispered, "See? Life takes its toll." It didn't take long for the truth to come out. Bankruptcy was inevitable. Companies closing, employees fired, properties frozen by the courts. Alberto, accustomed to giving orders, was now surrounded by lawyers who spoke in terms he did not want to hear. Attachment, execution, insolvency. That night, locked in his apartment, he kicked furniture, broke glasses, and threw papers into the air. "I won't lose," he shouted, as if anger could stop the collapse, but nothing changed. Ruin advanced relentlessly. One day, as he was leaving a bank after yet another unsuccessful meeting, Alberto passed by the same luxurious restaurant where he used to flaunt his arrogance. He paused for a few seconds in front of the door. He wanted to come in. He wanted to show that he was still the same. But he hesitated. He knew the looks would be different now. He would no longer be received like a king. And then for the first time he tasted what he had always despised, the fear of being nothing. Nothing. The contrast with Raphael while Alberto sank. Raphael flourished. At Augusto's company, his ideas were heard. His reports were respected. At college, professors cited him as an example of dedication. At home, her mother, although frail, smiled proudly at each achievement. The same week that Alberto had his luxury cars seized, Raphael was invited to participate in a student seminar, presenting his first paper on leadership and business ethics. Two destinies, two directions, and the line that separated them grew thinner and thinner. Alberto hadn't hit rock bottom yet. The worst was yet to come. And when everything abandoned him, fortune, friends, prestige, he would discover that the only hand capable of extending help was the very one he had scorned. Rock bottom, the following weeks were relentless. The newspapers no longer spoke of Alberto as a visionary, but as failure headlines featured photos of him leaving courtrooms, his expression downcast, his gaze lost. Their luxury cars were taken away in tow trucks, their mansions confiscated to pay debts. Even the roof where he was hiding was taken by creditors. Suddenly, the man who was once a symbol of power was wandering the streets in search of solutions that did not exist. Absolute loneliness. The friends disappeared. The sycophants have disappeared. The partners, who had previously toasted with champagne, now pretended not to recognize him in public. On a rainy afternoon, Alberto tried to call old allies. "I need help," he said. "Just a chance, an investment, a bridge." The answers were cold. "Unfortunately, I can't get involved. Your image is too burned. You better step back, Alberto." And then, silence. The silence of someone who discovers they never had friends, only accomplices. The memory that returns one night. Sitting on a park bench, his jacket soaked from the rain, Alberto remembered a distant scene, the note thrown on the floor, wine dripping down her apron, the humble waiter who refused to bow. At that moment, he realized the cruel irony of fate. Life had placed him exactly in the place he always despised. Powerless, statusless, invisible, and the memory of Raphael began to haunt him. The inevitable reunion the following days were even worse. With no other options, Alberto began knocking on doors he never would have imagined. He sought out smaller business owners, distant acquaintances, any opportunity. But the name Santoro no longer opened doors. It closed them, until he heard about a company on the rise. A company led by none other than Augusto, the man who had believed in Raphael. It was his last letter. Alberto took a deep breath, straightened his wrinkled suit, and entered the building. The receptionist announced it. He entered the meeting room. And there, before him, he found the face that destiny had reserved as a mirror, Raphael. The same waiter he once humiliated in front of everyone, the same one he had forced to bend down to pick up a note from the floor. Now, sitting at the table with a firm posture, Raphael was part of something much bigger than Alberto could have imagined. The impossible request. For a moment, Alberto wanted to maintain his arrogance. He wanted to pretend he was still who he had been. But the words died in his throat, her eyes welled up. Her voice broke. "Raphael," he said, swallowing hard, "I need help." The silence that followed was heavy. It was the sound of pride breaking. It was the sound of fate collecting its debt. The millionaire he had despised now begged. The humiliated waiter was now the outstretched hand. Life had turned around, and nothing would ever be the same again. The reunion wasn't just a cry for help. It was the final test. Raphael would have to decide between revenge and compassion. The first look, the silence in that room seemed to have weight. On one side, Raphael, now with a firm posture, wearing simple but neat clothes, with the serene look of someone who has learned to carry responsibility. On the other, Alberto Santoro, the once business giant, now dejected, his suit crumpled, his gaze lost, like a ship adrift. The two stared at each other for seconds that seemed eternal. Raphael didn't need to say anything. His presence was already a sufficient response to the past. Alberto was the first to speak. His voice, previously arrogant and full of power, now sounded weak, almost trembling. "Raphael, I need your help." The words came out as if they were tearing from his throat. For a man accustomed to seeing everyone bow before him, begging was worse than death. But desperation left him no choice. "I know I was wrong," he continued. "I know I treated you like nothing. But life took everything from me. And now you're the only one who can lend me a hand." Silence once again dominated the room. Raphael took a deep breath. Inside him, old images came back. The note thrown on the floor, the wine staining his apron, the laughter that echoed through the restaurant. And along with that came more recent memories, her mother's words, her studies, Augusto's hand offering her a chance. For a moment, Raphael felt the weight of revenge pulse through his veins. It would be so easy to deny. It would be so fair. In human eyes, to just turn away and let him taste the poison he always served to others. But inside him, something stronger fought. It wasn't just about Alberto. It was about himself, about who he had become. If I act like he acted towards me, then I will be no different. This thought echoed like a hammer in his mind. Augusto, who was watching the scene in silence, noticed the turmoil inside Raphael, did not interfere. He knew that decision was not his to make. It was life placing master and apprentice before the greatest test of all. The choice between repeating the cruelty or overcoming it. Raphael was facing his final test. The chance to demote Alberto was tempting, But if he chose differently, he could change not only Santoro's fate, but his own. Raphael rested his hands on the table and stared at Alberto for a few seconds. His gaze wasn't one of hatred, but of firmness. "Do you remember that night?" he asked, his voice calm but sharp. "The restaurant was full. Your table was surrounded by laughter, and I was just a waiter trying to do my job." Alberto swallowed hard. He lowered his eyes, but Raphael continued. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. You threw money on the floor like it was trash. You stained my uniform with wine like I was an old rag." He paused. "You said I was nothing." The words echoed through the room like sharp blades. Alberto tried to maintain his composure, but the weight of the memory was unbearable. I remember," Alberto murmured, almost voiceless. "And I regret it." Raphael raised an eyebrow. "Regret?" he repeated. "Or fear of losing everything?" Silence answered for Alberto. Augusto, sitting in the corner, watched in silence. The scene seemed like a play written by fate itself. Raphael walked slowly to the living room window. He looked out at the illuminated city, the buildings rising like symbols of power. Then he turned to Alberto. "You thought the power was in money. But look, the money is gone, and with it went your friends, your partners, your false greatness." He took a deep breath. "Now you're here before me asking for help." Alberto closed his eyes. The tears, which he had always considered weakness, began to flow. "I have nothing left, Raphael. Nothing." His voice was a desperate whisper. "Please, I beg you. Give me a chance." Inside, Raphael still felt the weight of the old humiliation, but he also remembered his mother's words. "Don't lower your head, my son. God sees you." Maybe this was the moment to show the world and himself that he didn't need to be a mirror of cruelty. He took a deep breath, looked into Alberto's eyes and said, "I am not like you were with me." The sentence fell in the room like thunder. But what did that statement mean? Alberto expected the worst, until he heard the decision that would change everything. The silence seemed to suffocate the room. Alberto looked at Raphael like a drowning man looks at his last lifeline. Raphael took a deep breath and repeated, "I am not like you were with me." The voice came out firm, loaded with meaning. He approached Alberto and continued, "I could turn my back on you now. I could laugh at your downfall. I could return every humiliation you made me swallow. But that wouldn't make me better. It would make me the same." Alberto trembled. For the first time, he felt he had no control whatsoever. "So, are you going to help me?" he asked, his voice broken. Raphael looked at him firmly. "Yes, but not as you expect." Alberto frowned, confused. "You're going to work again. You'll start from the bottom, like everyone should. No privileges, no sycophants, no masks. If you accept, I'll give you a chance to learn what really matters, the value of work and humility." The words fell like hammer blows on Alberto's heart. For a few seconds, he wanted to refuse. He wanted to scream, stand up, regain his old arrogance, but there was no strength left. The pride that had always been his armor was now just a broken burden. With teary eyes, he murmured, "I accept." It was the most difficult sentence Alberto had ever uttered in his entire life. Raphael nodded silently. There was no pleasure in him at seeing the former arrogant man on his knees. There was only the certainty that I was choosing a different path. I did not come into this world to repeat cruelty. I came to break the cycle, he thought. Alberto left the room with heavy steps, like a dethroned king who now carried invisible chains. Raphael remained for a few moments looking out the window, the city shining outside. He knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter. Not just for Alberto, but for himself. The humiliated waiter did not become vengeful. He became an example. And the millionaire he despised would now have to learn day after day the value of humility. Fate had not only turned around, it had written an eternal lesson. But accepting menial work wouldn't be easy for Alberto. With every simple task, he felt shame burn like fire. And the true test of his transformation was just beginning. His transformation was just beginning. The beginning of a new life. The Monday following their reunion, Alberto Santoro arrived early at Augusto's company. But this time not as a businessman invited to a lavish meeting. It arrived as entry-level employee. At the reception, eyes turned to him. Some recognized him from newspapers, others from past public appearances. Whispers spread like poison. "Is it really him? The bankrupt Santoro. I can't believe you're working here. Who would have thought, huh? Alberto felt his face burn. The man who once entered any room to applause now entered to muffled laughter. Raphael was waiting for him in the administrative area. His expression was firm but not arrogant. Simply serene. "Good morning, Alberto," he said. "Good morning," he replied, almost swallowing the words. Raphael held out a clipboard with notes on it. "These are your first tasks: organizing old documents, filing reports, and helping in the kitchen with coffee." Alberto's eyes widened. "Coffee? I can't—" Raphael interrupted him firmly. "You asked for help. I told you it wouldn't be like before. Everyone works here. If you don't accept, the door is right there." Alberto swallowed hard. For the first time, he had no choice. He picked up the clipboard and headed to the pantry. As he put the kettle on and made coffee for the others, Alberto felt a pain that was not physical. Era the wound in pride. Each cup served was like an invisible slap to his past. Employees watched him, some with irony, others with disbelief. But Raphael silently also watched, not to humiliate him, but to see if he would learn. At the end of the day, Alberto was tasked with filing dozens of folders in a stuffy room. Sweaty, tired, and out of practice, he dropped a stack on the floor. Papers scattered, and some people laughed as they passed through the hallway. "Be careful there." "Santoro," one of them said mockingly. "The millions could slip through your fingers." Alberto closed his eyes and took a deep breath. His instinct was to scream, to react, to crush them, but he had no power left. The only thing he could do was kneel down and pick up the papers one by one. At that moment, he remembered Raphael on that distant night, kneeling in the restaurant to pick up the note he had thrown on the floor. The scene came back like a punch to the gut, and the irony destroyed him inside. Now, he was the humiliated one. At the end of the day, Raphael entered the file room and found Alberto still finishing his work. "Are you finished?" he asked. "Almost," Alberto replied without looking at him. Raphael came closer, helped stack the last folders, and said, "It's not easy, I know, but every task has value. Even the smallest one teaches something." Alberto didn't answer. He just nodded silently. The lesson was just beginning. The former millionaire would have to face not only simple tasks, but also the judgment of others and, most importantly, the struggle against his own ego. The routine that destroys pride that week. Alberto discovered what it meant to start from the bottom. Tasks he once despised were now part of his routine. Serving coffee, making copies, carrying boxes, organizing dusty files. The man who once signed million-dollar contracts now spent hours in front of a noisy copy machine. The man who once paraded at gala dinners now balanced trays of cups for his colleagues. Every gesture was a cruel reminder of his fall. Company employees never missed a chance to comment. "Did you see Santoro today? It took him 3 trips to carry those boxes." Who would have thought, huh? The king serving coffee. Life really does take turns. Some laughed openly. Others whispered in the hallways. Alberto pretended not to hear, but each word was like a needle piercing his dignity. One afternoon, as he spilled coffee on his suit, he heard a loud laugh. "Look there. Even as a waiter, he's bad." Alberto's hands trembled. The instinct to scream still lingered within him. But when he looked up, he saw Raphael watching from afar. Raphael's look was not one of mockery, but of evaluation, and that made him shut up. Over time, Alberto began to notice things he had never noticed before. As I organized documents, I saw how important each piece of paper was to keeping the company running. As I served coffee, I noticed how a simple gesture could make someone's day better. As I cleaned conference tables, I realized that no detail was too small to be invaluable. It was as if life was rubbing a lesson in his face. Power is not in being served, but in serving. The lonely night one night after work, Alberto walked through the deserted city streets. He no longer had a car, a driver, or security. He carried only a simple bag, with some papers and crumpled clothes. He sat down on a park bench, looked at his hands calloused from the week's work, and sighed. He remembered looking at Raphael with contempt. Now, he was the one bearing the brunt of the humiliation. The tears flowed silently. It was the first time in years that I cried, not out of anger, but because I recognized that I needed to change. The next morning, Raphael called him into the room. "Sit down, Alberto." Alberto obeyed. Raphael then said, I know it's not easy, and I won't lie, it's going to hurt even more. But that's the process. Each task is a brick. If you endure, you'll understand what true dignity is. Alberto lowered his head, embarrassed. I'm trying, Raphael nodded. Continue. The former millionaire was beginning to feel the weight of the transformation, but the true test was yet to come. A situation that would pit his pride against the value of humility before everyone. It was Friday. The company was hosting a group of investors for an important meeting. Everything had to be impeccable. Clean rooms, organized tables, coffee served. Raphael, responsible for coordinating the preparations, called Alberto. Today is your test, Alberto. I want you to be the one serving the investors. The former millionaire froze. His face lost its color. Sir, of all people, me? Yes, Raphael replied firmly. It's time to show whether you've learned to value the work you once despised. Alberto swallowed hard. Pride screamed inside him, but reason told him he had no choice. When the investors arrived, everything seemed like a scene from the past. Men in expensive suits, women in elegant dresses, talk of million-dollar deals. It was exactly the kind of table Alberto used to sit at, giving orders and being served. Now, however, he was on the other side. With trembling hands, he balanced the tray with cups and bottles of coffee. Eyes soon turned to him. Some recognized him. Isn't that Santoro? The same one who lost everything? Are you serving coffee? The word stung, but Alberto continued. He placed each cup carefully, one by one, making sure nothing spilled. From the corner of the room, Raphael watched in silence. There was no smile, no sarcasm. Just a watchful eye like someone evaluating a final exam. When Alberto finished, he heard one of the investors chuckle softly. Look, the world really does go around. Inside, he felt like dropping everything and screaming, but he took a deep breath and replied, his voice firm yet low. Yes, and it's in these turns that we learn who we really are. The room fell silent. Even the laughter stopped for a moment. After the meeting, Raphael approached. You endured, he said. It wasn't easy, I know. But today you showed something you've never shown before. Respect for your work and for those around you. Alberto, still with tears in his eyes, replied, For the first time. I felt human. Raphael placed his hand on her shoulder and concluded, It's just the beginning. The millionaire who once despised waiters now carried the tray with humility. It was not just a change of function, but of essence. Pride was being shattered, and in the void that remained, the possibility of a new man emerged. But could Alberto bear to continue on this path of humility, or would the weight of the past still be a shadow capable of dragging him back? After the episode in which he served coffee in front of the investors, Alberto was unable to sleep. He relived the scene in his mind, the mocking looks, the muffled laughter, the weight of the tray in his hands, and above all, the phrase he himself had uttered. It is in the twists and turns of life that we learn who we really are. It was as if he heard himself for the first time. The next morning he arrived at the company early. His expression was drawn but different. There was not only weariness in his eyes but a spark of understanding. Shortly after, Raphael called him into the room. Alberto entered slowly, like a defendant before a judge. Raphael, sitting at the table, looked at him firmly. Alberto, he began, you've already suffered humiliations you never imagined. The arrogant man I met at the restaurant seems to be gone. Alberto took a deep breath, not having the courage to answer. But there's still one question, Raphael continued. Are you truly willing to change? Or have you just accepted this because you had no choice? The room fell silent. Alberto opened his mouth, but no words came out. I felt shame, pain, fear of not being believed. Finally, he murmured, I don't know who I am without money. But I want to learn. It was the first time he had clearly admitted his fragility. Raphael watched intently, silently, as if weighing every word spoken. Then Raphael stood up and said, Very well. From today on, you won't just be an assistant. I want you to work on projects with me. You'll start small, but you'll really learn. Alberto's eyes widened in surprise. You're going to give me that chance? It's not a gift, Raphael replied. It's a responsibility. If you fail, you won't have another. Alberto nodded, moved. For the first time in years, someone believed in him not because of the money. But in spite of it, Alberto was given a new chance. But with it would also come the greatest challenge, proving that he could reinvent himself as a man and as a professional. The next morning, Alberto received his first official challenge to help prepare a market report for a new client. To a man accustomed to lavish gatherings but not to practical work, it seemed a strange world. In front of the computer screen, he was lost among spreadsheets, technical terms and graphs. Hands trembled on the keyboard. Pride whispered, "You've run companies before, you shouldn't be typing here." But reality screamed louder, "You lost everything. It's now or never." In the corridors, the comments continued. "Look there, the ex-millionaire trying to work on a spreadsheet. I bet you don't even know how to use a basic formula. He'll end up asking someone to do it for him." Alberto listened, but this time he didn't react. He knew that shouting wouldn't help. He swallowed each word like bitter medicine. That afternoon, Rafael asked Alberto to present part of the report at an internal meeting. He stood up, took the papers with trembling hands and began to speak. But halfway through his explanation, he got the numbers mixed up. The graph he'd projected showed exactly the opposite of what he'd said. The colleagues laughed. One of them commented aloud, "Even in this, he stumbles." Alberto froze, his face burning. He thought about dropping everything and leaving, but then he heard Rafael's calm voice. "Go on, Alberto. Fix it, show me you know how to get up." He took a deep breath, reviewed the numbers, and corrected the explanation. It wasn't perfect, but it ended, and for the first time, he didn't run away from the mistake. After the meeting, Rafael called him aside. "You made a mistake, yes, but what matters is that you didn't give up," he said. "Remember, greatness isn't about never falling. It's about always getting up." The words echoed deep within Alberto. For the first time, he felt like maybe he could start over. In the following days, he began to dedicate himself diligently. I arrived early, asked questions, studied, copied notes from old reports. His colleagues were still suspicious, but some began to notice. The man was really trying. He no longer sought luxury. I was looking for apprenticeship, and, little by little, he took the first steps towards rebuilding his dignity. But the final test remained, to show, before everyone, that he was no longer the same arrogant man, and that he could serve without shame. It was Friday. The entire company was called to a general meeting. The corridors were filled with murmurs. It must be some important announcement. Is it about the new customers? Or maybe about cuts? In the auditorium, everyone sat down. On stage, Rafael took the floor. "Today, I'm not just going to talk about numbers. I want to talk about transformation." He paused, letting the silence spread. "Months ago, we welcomed someone we all know. A man who was at the top and fell, who humiliated and was humiliated, and who is now relearning the value of work." Everyone knew who he was talking about. Eyes turned to Alberto, sitting in the back row. Rafael continued, "Alberto, come here to the front." A chill ran down the former millionaire's spine. He stood up slowly, under dozens of curious gazes, some mocking, others merely attentive. On stage, Rafael handed him a tray with glasses of water. "Serve everyone present." A murmur ran through the room. Some laughed. Others were shocked. Alberto trembled. Pride screamed within him. "You don't have to go through this." But as he looked at Rafael, he remembered the words. Greatness is not about never falling. It is about always getting up. He took a deep breath and began to serve, and began to serve. One by one, Alberto handed out the glasses. Not in a hurry, not in anger, calmly looking into each person's eyes, as if to say, "I respect you." The auditorium, which had started with giggles, gradually fell silent. People noticed. He was no longer the arrogant man. He was someone who had learned humility the hard way. When he finished, he returned to the stage, empty tray in hand. Rafael placed his hand on her shoulder and declared, "Today, he proved he's willing to change. And everyone here should learn a lesson. No one is so big they can't fall, and no one is so small they can't get up." The room burst into applause, not of irony, but of respect. Alberto lowered his head, tears streaming down his face for the first time. I wasn't crying from defeat, but from relief. At that moment, he understood that Rafael's unexpected response had not been revenge, but redemption. The humiliated waiter extended his hand to the ruined millionaire. And before everyone, he showed that forgiveness can transform even the harshest arrogance into humility. Life didn't just turn around. It wrote a new story. But transformation doesn't happen overnight. Alberto's true test would begin now, living daily as someone renewed. After the meeting where he served water in front of the entire company, Alberto thought things would get easier. But I was wrong. If before he was the target of whispers, now he had become the target of tests. Colleagues took every opportunity to push tasks onto him that no one else wanted to do. Santoro, take these boxes to the warehouse. Hey, the coffee is out, ask the new waiter. Oh, since you're helping, go to the stationery store and buy reams of paper. Alberto felt each order like a stab to his vanity. The man who had ruled empires now carried weight, washed cups and fetched office supplies. But he swallowed every insult, and silently he complied. The provocations, not everyone accepted his presence. Some saw him only as the former arrogant man in disguise. Don't be fooled, said one of the analysts. He's just feigning humility to take advantage later. Leopards never lose their spots, added another. These words echoed through the halls. Alberto heard them, but instead of reacting, he remained silent. For the first time, his response wasn't screaming. It was silence Raphael watched from afar. Not with pleasure, not with mockery, but with attention. I knew that every humiliation was a test, and he also knew there was no point in defending Alberto. The transformation needed to come from him, not from others. One afternoon he approached and said, "Keep holding on. Every day you don't explode, you win a war against yourself." Alberto just nodded, speechless. But inside him, the struggle was intense. At night, alone in his simple room, he remembered when he gave orders and everyone obeyed. Pride whispered, "You weren't born for this. You were a king. Don't accept this life of a servant." But then reality screamed, "It was that pride that brought you down." Between whispers and screams, Alberto closed his eyes, trying to find peace. In the midst of all this, something unexpected happened. One of the interns, seeing Alberto carrying heavy boxes, offered to help. "Let me take half, Mr. Alberto." He was surprised. No one had called him sir in a long time. For a moment, he felt his heart warm. Maybe, just maybe, someone would begin to see in him more than the shadow of the arrogant man he once was. Alberto endured the first trials of his new life, but he would soon face an even harsher ordeal, being publicly humiliated and having to decide whether to remain silent or fight back. The invitation to fall the following week, the company organized an internal event to present results to clients. It was an elegant gathering, with a buffet, drinks, background music, and dozens of important guests. Raphael, as manager, coordinated everything, and Alberto, as part of the team, was assigned to help with reception and service. Eyes lit up as soon as he appeared with the tray in his hands. Whispers arose like poison. "I can't believe it. It's Santoro waiting tables, the same man who once had columns in business magazines." How cruel the world is. The planned humiliation among the guests was an old friend of Alberto, the businessman Nico, who had so often laughed beside him at the luxurious tables. Nico recognized him and didn't miss the chance. Well, if it isn't the great Santoro," he said loudly so everyone could hear. "Now he's become an official waiter?" Some laughed. Others pretended not to hear. Alberto felt his face burn. The tray trembled in his hands. It was as if the past had come back to crush him. Nico approached, took a glass, and, in a mocking tone, added, "Do you remember when you made a waiter kneel to collect money?" Yeah, life really is a wheel, isn't it? The laughter around grew louder. Alberto closed his eyes for a moment. Pride roared inside him, urging him to scream, to push, to return the humiliation. But when he opened his eyes, he saw Raphael in the background, the serene, firm gaze, as if saying without words, "Show that you have changed." Alberto took a deep breath and he simply replied, "Yes, life takes turns. And today I learned what I didn't understand before." The laughter stopped for a few seconds. Nico, surprised, found no immediate reply. Silence fell over the circle. Some looked away, embarrassed by the answer. Alberto continued serving without haste, without bowing to humiliation. It was living proof that he was breaking the chains of pride. When the event was over, Alberto was collecting the last glasses when Raphael approached. "You passed," he said quietly. "Today you showed that you're stronger than you were when you had everything." Alberto nodded, tired but with a small flame of peace in his heart. Alberto had overcome public humiliation. But fate wasn't finished testing him yet. An unexpected challenge would give him the chance to finally redeem himself. The unexpected challenge: a few days after the event, the company received a visit from a new potential client. It was a decisive meeting, and everyone was tense. The documents were prepared, the presentation ready, but minutes before, a problem arose. The employee responsible for the graphic material was late. Without the printed reports, the meeting would be a failure. Raphael looked around, searching for a quick solution. Before he could decide, Alberto stood up. "I'll fix it." He grabbed the digital files, ran to the nearest printing shop, stood in line, explained the urgency, and paid with the little money he still had saved. As he waited for the printers to roar, he remembered how many times he had looked down on employees who rushed to solve invisible problems like this. Now it was him, sweaty, anxious, begging for everything to work out. With the stack of hot reports in his hands, he hurried back to the company. He entered the meeting room at the exact moment the client arrived. Alberto placed the reports on the table. One by one, carefully, Raphael looked at him silently, but with a slight nod of approval. During the meeting, no one commented on his effort. There was no applause, no immediate recognition. But Alberto didn't care. For the first time, he felt the satisfaction of having done something important without expecting anything in return. At the end of the day, Raphael called Alberto into the room. "I saw what you did. You could have let others take the blame, but you took the risk," he said. Alberto took a deep breath. "I just didn't want the company to lose because of one detail." Raphael smiled slightly. That's what separates an arrogant person from a leader. Thinking about the whole, not just about themselves. Returning home that night, Alberto walked through the simple streets and looked up at the starry sky. For the first time in a long time, he didn't just feel ashamed or angry. He felt a quiet relief, as if he were beginning to make peace with himself. "Maybe I can still be someone better," he thought. The man who once believed himself untouchable now learned, step by step, the value of humility. Life did not spare him, but each test he endured was a brick rebuilding his soul, and destiny silently prepared the next challenge. But the biggest test was yet to come. It wouldn't be in front of reports or investors. It would be in front of life itself. It was a typical morning at the company. Employees rushed in, meetings were scheduled, and phones rang nonstop. Alberto had already gotten used to his new routine, carrying boxes, organizing reports, serving coffee. He didn't complain anymore. He just did it, but that day would not be ordinary. Fate once again prepared a test. Around noon, a short circuit in one of the archive rooms caused smoke to appear. First discreet, almost imperceptible, then dense, suffocating, taking over entire corridors. The alarm went off. Employees began to run in panic. Shouts echoed. Hurried footsteps, doors slamming, chaos was established. Alberto, in the midst of the confusion, felt his heart race. For a second, he thought about running away like everyone else. Survival comes first. That was how he had always lived. But when he looked back, he saw a scene that stopped him in his tracks. A young clerk, trapped in the file room, banged against the locked door, coughing amid the smoke. No one stopped to help. Everyone ran. Without thinking twice, Alberto ran towards the smoke. He broke down the door with his shoulders, pulled the girl out, and supported her in his arms. "Take a deep breath," he said, trying to guide her to the emergency exit. But on the way, a burning wooden beam fell, blocking part of the corridor. The smoke became unbearable. The heat burned the skin. For an instant, fear gripped him. "I won't be able to." But then he remembered Raphael's words. Greatness is not about never falling. It is about always getting up. And with all his strength, he pushed the beam, opened a passage, and managed to get out. Outside, the firefighters were already arriving. Employees looked on in astonishment. The man who had previously been seen as arrogant now emerged from the smoke carrying someone in his arms. The girl was rescued. Alberto fell to his knees, panting, covered in soot. The looks that were once mocking were now ones of respect. Alberto had saved a life, but the greatest test was not yet complete. Inside the building, someone much closer to him was in danger. Alberto was still on his knees, trying to catch his breath when he heard screams coming from inside the building. "Help! Someone, please!" It was a familiar voice. He raised his head and amidst the thick smoke, recognized the figure Raphael, the young man, who had so often extended his hand to him, was trapped on the upper floor, helping to evacuate the last workers when the staircase collapsed. Alberto froze for a moment. His heart raced. All instincts screamed, "Don't come back. You've already done your part." But there was something stronger. This time, it wasn't just about saving someone. It was about saving the one who had given him the chance to start over. Without thinking twice, Alberto got up and ran back into the building. The firefighters tried to stop him. "It's too dangerous, go back." But he didn't listen. He entered the corridor engulfed in fire. Every step was a struggle. The heat burned, the smoke suffocated. The eyes burned. Up above, Raphael was coughing, trying to find a way out. When he saw Alberto emerge from the smoke, his eyes widened. "Alberto? What are you doing here? I came to get you out of here," he shouted, his voice hoarse. The flames advanced. The ceiling creaked, ready to collapse. Alberto grabbed Raphael by the arm and pulled him. "Let's go." "No, wait, the ladder fell," Raphael replied. They looked around. The only exit was a window that opened onto a sunroom. Risky, but possible. Alberto didn't think twice. He pushed a table up to the window, broke the glass with a kick and pointed. "Jump!" "I'll catch you." Raphael hesitated for a moment, but the cracking sounds from the ceiling warned that there was no time. With one last look of confidence, he jumped. Alberto grabbed him by the shoulders and together they fell onto the marquee. They rolled to the ground, coughing, gasping, but alive. Outside, as firefighters controlled the flames, employees gathered around. Everyone watched in silence. The arrogant former millionaire, now covered in ash, had risked his own life to save Raphael. And Raphael, between coughs, murmured, "You proved that you changed." Alberto, with tears in his eyes, replied, "I didn't do it for myself. I did it because you believed when no one else did." Alberto had survived the fire, but now he would have to face an even greater challenge, proving that this courage was not just an isolated act, but a new way of living. Outside, the flames were still consuming part of the building, but the worst was over. Firefighters controlled the fire, employees received medical attention, and the street was filled with sirens and smoke. In the midst of that chaotic scene, Alberto and Raphael stood side by side, exhausted, covered in soot, but alive. The silence around was heavy. Everyone looked at them not with mockery, but with respect. One of the analysts, the one who always made fun of Alberto, approached, still in disbelief. I saw you go back in there. You risked your life." Alberto didn't answer. He just lowered his head. No applause needed. For the first time, I felt like the act spoke for itself. Another employee, moved, added, "No one here will ever forget what you did today." Later, at the hospital, while they were receiving oxygen and basic care, Raphael turned to him and said, "Alberto, you could have run away like before. But you came back, and not to save anyone but me, the waiter you once despised." The words were spoken without rancor, only with truth. Alberto closed his eyes, overcome with emotion. "I needed it. It was the only way to prove that I'm not that man anymore." Raphael nodded. "Then prove it every day. Not just with great acts, but with simple choices." In the days that followed, Alberto no longer walked around the company like the humiliated former millionaire. But he also didn't seek to be the great Santoro again. It was just Alberto, a man under reconstruction. He helped more than was asked. He greeted colleagues with respect. He listened silently when someone corrected him, and little by little, the label of arrogant was being replaced by that of transformed man. One quiet night, alone in his simple room, Alberto looked in the mirror. He no longer saw the millionaire in the impeccable suit, not even the desperate bankrupt. He saw only a man who had learned, through pain and fire, that true greatness lies not in being served, but in serving. He smiled for the first time in a long time, and he murmured, "Thank you, God." For knocking me down so I could learn to get up. The fire didn't just destroy walls. It burned away the arrogance, the pride, and the mask of a man who believed himself invincible. And from the ashes, someone new was born, ready to begin again. The greatest test had been overcome. But life gives no rest. Alberto's transformation would be tested not only within the company, but also by choices that would involve his past. And his future. The false calm after the fire, the company gradually recovered. Raphael resumed his projects. The employees returned to their normal routine, and even the building was undergoing renovations. Alberto continued to stick to his simple routine. He arrived early, completed tasks, and learned with humility. It seemed that finally, his life was coming into balance, but the past rarely allows peace so easily. The ghost of the past one rainy afternoon. While organizing reports, Alberto received an unexpected visit. At reception, a man demanded to see him. When he entered the room, the air became heavy. Era Marcelo, former partner and accomplice from his times of arrogance. The cold look, the cynical smile. So it's true. The great Santoro has now become an employee, he said mockingly. Alberto remained silent, trying to control his racing heart. I came to offer you a chance, Marcelo continued. I have a side business. Risky but profitable. You and I together again can make up for what you lost. The dilemma, Alberto felt his stomach churn. For years that proposal would have been irresistible. Fast money, immediate power, but now, something inside him screamed that he couldn't go back. I'm not interested, he replied firmly. Marcelo laughed. Don't be silly. Do you think these idiots here will actually accept you? You'll die a second-rate employee. Come back with me, Santoro. Go back to being who you were. The voice echoed like a dangerous temptation. Raphael's gaze at the door. Raphael had arrived without them noticing. I watched in silence. Alberto noticed his presence and felt an even greater weight. He knew that his answer would define not only his life, but his honor before those who had believed in him. He took a deep breath. He looked at Marcelo, and he said, This man you seek is dead. Today I choose another path. The threat. Marcelo narrowed his eyes, irritated. You'll regret it, Santoro. Those who turn their backs on me won't stay standing for long. He left, slamming the door, leaving tension in the air. Raphael approached slowly and said, You've passed the greatest test, but this is the final test. To show every day that you won't go back to the past. Alberto nodded, still shaken. I knew Raphael's words were true. The past had knocked on his door. Now Alberto needed to show that he had not only changed, but that he was willing to pay the price for staying on the path of transformation. Marcelo couldn't swallow defeats. For him, Alberto's refusal was not only an affront, but a betrayal, and he decided that if he couldn't have him as an ally, he would do everything he could to destroy him. He began spreading discreet rumors. Do you really trust this Santoro? They whispered in the company corridors. He's already fooled half the world. Do you think he's suddenly changed like that? Some laughed, others pretended not to hear, but doubt began to circulate like invisible poison. Days later, Marcelo appeared again, this time in a more treacherous manner. He forged documents, adulterated reports, and sent them into the hands of clients as if they had been prepared by Alberto. The result was immediate. Angry phone calls, tense meetings, suspicious looks. Suddenly, everyone looked at Alberto as if he were guilty. Was it him? They whispered. I always suspected that I hadn't changed. Leopards don't lose their spots. Alberto, upon hearing this, felt the ground open beneath his feet. Called into Raphael and Augusto's room, Alberto found himself faced with serious looks. These documents bear your signature, Augusto said coldly. I swear it wasn't me, Alberto replied, his voice breaking. Someone is trying to destroy me. Raphael looked deep into her eyes. He knew the pain of lying, but he also knew how to recognize the truth. I believe you, he said, breaking the silence. The words were like balm, but also a burden. If he failed, he would lose the only confidence he had left. That same night, Alberto decided to act. He discreetly followed Marcelo to a dark bar on the outskirts. From afar, he watched as he handed the same doctored paperwork to a suspicious contact. It was the proof I needed, but also the danger he feared. If he moved forward, he could put himself at risk. If he backed down, he would lose his new life. The dilemma burned inside him. Alberto was faced with a choice: face Marcelo and prove his innocence, or run away and let the past drag him back to ruin. The inevitable confrontation, Alberto knew he couldn't wait. He entered the bar, facing the smell of smoke and the hostile looks of those present. Marcelo saw him and smiled cynically. Well, well, the little lamb decided to show up, he mocked. Did he come crawling to beg for forgiveness? Alberto took a deep breath. No, I came to put an end to this. You're destroying me with lies, but today I'm going to expose the truth. Marcelo laughed out loud. You have no proof. No one will believe you. Alberto raised his cell phone, recording the entire conversation. I already have it. Enraged, Marcelo advanced. He grabbed Alberto by the collar, trying to knock him down, but instead of reacting violently, Alberto remained calm. I won't be like you, he said firmly. I won't win with hate. I'll win with the truth. He pushed him just enough to free himself and walked out of the bar, leaving Marcelo screaming behind him. The next day, in front of the board and his colleagues, Alberto presented the recorded audio. The evidence was clear. Marcelo had set him up. Silence filled the room. Some, ashamed, lowered their heads for having believed the rumors. Augustus stood up and declared, It's proven. Alberto not only told the truth, but he resisted the temptation to return to his former self. That's character. Raphael looked at him with pride. You passed the last test. Alberto felt tears sting his eyes, not of pain, but of relief. For the first time, I no longer carried the chains of the past. I didn't have to prove anything to anyone, just live each day as a new man. That night, alone at home, he opened the window and let the wind in. He looked up at the starry sky and murmured, I am no longer a slave to pride. I am free. The man who had once humbled, fallen, suffered, and nearly been destroyed now rose as one transformed. Not by money, not by power, but by the courage to change. The ultimate test had been passed. But every true transformation doesn't end in itself. Life now demanded of Alberto a new step, to use his story to transform others. The silence after the storm, after the final confrontation with Marcelo, Alberto's life seemed for the first time in years at peace. He no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. He was no longer the arrogant millionaire, nor the desperate bankrupt. He was just a man under reconstruction. The days passed, and with them came routine, work, small gestures of humility, continuous learning. But inside him a question grew silently. And now? What's all this for? What's the meaning of my new life? The conversation with Raphael one quiet afternoon. Raphael asked him to walk to a nearby square. They sat on a simple bench, watching children playing, families talking, ordinary people going about their lives. Alberto, Raphael began, you've gone through the toughest tests life could throw at you. But true transformation isn't just for you. Alberto frowned. Like this? Your story isn't just yours. It's a message. If you keep it to yourself, it dies with you. But if you decide to share it, it can change destinies. Those words hit deep. Alberto remained silent, reflecting. Days later, Augusto called him for a meeting. Alberto, I've been invited to give a lecture at a university. They wanted me to speak about business ethics. But I believe there's no one better than you to explain what it means to fall and get back up. Alberto's eyes widened. Me? Public speaking? Yes, Augusto replied firmly. Not as the millionaire you once were, but as the transformed man you are now. Alberto's heart raced. The idea scared him. But at the same time, it ignited something new inside him. That night in his simple room, Alberto opened the mirror. He looked at himself for long minutes. He no longer saw the man he had been, nor the man who had fallen. Saw someone who had a mission. He took a deep breath and murmured, If my fall can save others, then I will tell my story. Alberto accepted for the first time that his pain had a greater purpose. But he didn't yet know the impact his words would have when spoken in public. The weight of the stage. The night of the lecture arrived. The university auditorium was packed. Business students, professors, local entrepreneurs. The buzz was intense. Many were eager to hear from Augusto, the respected investor. But when they saw Alberto take the stage, silence fell like a wave. Some recognized it from old headlines. The falling millionaire, murmurs began. It's him. What is he doing here? What are you going to say? How to lose everything. Alberto felt sweat run down his forehead, heart racing, hands trembling. For a moment he thought about running away. But then, he remembered Raphael, looking at him steadily in that old meeting. Greatness is not about never falling. It is about always getting up. He took a deep breath. He adjusted the microphone, and it began. Good night. The voice was weak, but enough to break the silence. I'm not here as a business expert. I'm here as someone who has lost everything, including himself. Alberto told his story without masks. He spoke of the luxurious tables, the $1 million contracts, the nights of arrogance. He spoke of the scene in which he humiliated a waiter, and how that memory haunted him. He spoke of the fall, of bankruptcy, of loneliness, of despair, and he spoke of the reunion, of how life placed him in front of the same waiter, now in a position of power. The words were heavy, but they were sincere. I needed to be destroyed to learn that dignity is not in being served, but in serving. When he finished, silence fell over the auditorium. For a few seconds, Alberto feared the worst. Mockery, criticism, rejection. But suddenly he heard applause. 1, 2, 3, until the whole room was in a standing ovation. Some students were crying. Teachers nodded, moved. A young man raised his hand and said, "Thank you for your courage. I've made a lot of mistakes too, but today I believe I can start over." Alberto sentiu as lágrimas escorrerem. For the first time, his pain had turned into hope for others. Alberto discovered that his story wasn't a source of shame, but of transformation. But the true impact of his testimony was only just beginning. When he stepped off the stage, Alberto was still shaking, but instead of looks of contempt, he was greeted with hugs, handshakes, and words of gratitude. "Your story gave me hope," said a young student. "Thank you for showing that there is always a way to start over," added another. With each word, Alberto felt something complete inside him. The shame that had plagued him for years began to dissolve, giving way to something new, purpose. Days later, he received a call. It was from an institution that worked with young people in vulnerable situations. "Mr. Alberto, we heard your lecture. We'd like you to share your experience with our students." He was silent for a few seconds before he would have refused. Today he replied, "And I go. Thus began an unexpected cycle. From auditoriums to simple rooms, Alberto began to tell his story in different places, not as the former millionaire, but as someone who talked about the fall, pride, and rebuilding. One day, as he was leaving one of these lectures, he found a simple, shabbily dressed man standing at the door. He came closer and said, "I lost everything too, and was thinking about ending my life. But hearing you speak gave me strength." Alberto held back his tears. He extended his hand and replied, "I know what it's like. And I want to walk with you in this reconstruction." At that moment, he understood that his life no longer belonged to him alone. She was tooled to lift others. Back in his simple room that night, Alberto wrote in an old notebook, "I no longer seek to be remembered as a millionaire. Want to be remembered as someone who learned to serve. My new purpose is to use my story to prevent others from falling into the same abyss I did." He closed the notebook, took a deep breath and smiled. It was as if finally the cycle had been completed. From luxury to downfall, from humiliation to transformation, Alberto discovered that his pain had a greater purpose: to save lives through his story. And so the man who was once a symbol of pride became a living example of redemption. But life always goes on, and Alberto's story now was no longer just his. It was everyone's story, who needed to believe that falling is not the end. And Alberto Santoro was long remembered as the arrogant millionaire who lost everything. The newspapers called him a failure, his partners treated him like dead weight, and even he himself believed he was nothing more than a ruined man. But life, with its silent justice, placed him before the hardest test: face one's own reflection and decide whether he would continue to be a slave to pride or be reborn as a new man. He chose the second option. It wasn't easy. Every tray carried, every cup served, every mocking laugh was a heavy brick on his shoulders, but every stone was also used to rebuild his dignity. Alberto, learned that there is no fall so deep that it prevents someone from getting up, and that true wealth is not in what you have, but in what you give. In the end, he was remembered not for the empire he built, but for the lives he impacted. He was not recognized for his cars, mansions, or parties, but for the words that rescued young people from the brink of the abyss. The waiter he once humiliated became the silent teacher who taught him the value of humility, and he now became a teacher to many others. If you are listening to this story now, remember, life can take everything from you: money, status, fake friends. But no one can take away your chance to start over. The fall is not the end. The end is to give up on getting up. Thus ends the story of Alberto Santoro. Not as a millionaire, not as a bankrupt, but as a transformed man. Life turned around and proved that even the hardest arrogance can bow before humility.